In Part 4 of Social and Leadership, we complete our assessment of global stability and then shift the discussion to the leadership of social forces, either positively or negatively influencing and shaping our unfolding culture. China, Communist China to be specific, has over the past 2 decades grown into the second largest economy in the world. Only the US is larger. With her new financial clout, China has significantly increased its military spending for both defensive and offensive weapons, and by consequence, is starting to threaten its southeast neighbors with her power. China, as we know quite well, has experienced a healthy growth to their economy, now holding 14.8% stake of the entire world economy, only behind the United States, which comes in at 24.3%. Additionally, if you look at the growth of GDP between China and the US, you can see that China has moved past the US in annual growth rates as of 2014, several years ago. As a consequence of national economic growth, China has begun feeding the tiger being their military. As you can see, China's published military budget has been skyrocketing, right in parallel to their economic expansion, and a bigger military brings more bravado and consequently expansionist aims. Again, as you can see, in the Southeast Asian region, China now dominates with sheer numbers of naval ships, submarines, and aircraft. Much of their military has been modernized, and they are readily deploying sophisticated satellite weaponry, advanced cruise missiles, stealth aircraft, and boisterous language. One of the biggest issues with China right now, in addition to its explicit support of North Korea, is China's ambition to expand its territorial claims. First, China has growing aggression in the South China Sea, claiming essentially the South China Sea are exclusively theirs and not international waters, or within the nautical rights of their southeastern nations. Implicit in their claim is also the airspace above the waters. In doing so, China is bullying her neighbors into relinquishing rights to either small islands or huge swaths of territorial waters and free navigation to those waters. Japan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Brunei, Malaysia, and Indonesia have all taken issue with China's greedy ambitions. On July 12, 2016, the Hague-based Permanent Court of Arbitration, PCA, issued a ruling on a case brought by the Philippines, holding that China's expansive claims to much of the South China Sea were not valid under international law. The United States has completely rejected China's false claims and regularly traverses both the sea lanes and airspace to assert freedom of navigation for all countries involved. Correspondingly, China has been expanding its naval, air, and missile technology to counter U.S. presence in the region. The U.S. has been shaping alignment with the governments of South Asian nations to resist potential Chinese aggression. The Chinese are vowing not to curtail their ambitions. In addition to China's sea claims, China has 13 active land and border disputes shown in yellow bursts, essentially ringing half of her border area, and Tibet would add another on the north. The other nations, represented in blue, are many of her neighbors. As a result, there is friction in this area of the world, making it an area of significant global instability. North Korea is a stick in the eye and adding another complex dimension to global stability, threatening nuclear war against the United States, South Korea, and Japan. Tensions are seriously mounting. The North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, a young dictator, is deemed psychotic and extremely unstable. Over the past few decades, North Korea has developed nuclear capability in defiance of the United Nations, the United States, Japan, Russia, and China. At present, North Korea is perfecting its nuclear arsenal in attendant delivery systems, regional, intercontinental, and submarine-launched missiles. North Korea now boasts the ability to hit the continental United States with a nuclear missile, and U.S. experts have confirmed the North Korean boast is closer to reality than bluster. The same goes for the U.S. military bases in Southeast Asia, the countries of South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. North Korea continues to conduct belligerent missile tests in the Sea of Japan, threatening its neighbors, and drills its army of over 1.2 million highly trained and loyal troops to be ready to attack South Korea. North Korea fields the fourth largest army in the world. Birds of feather flock together. Little surprise, both North Korea and Iran are working alongside each other in development of ballistic missile technology and further technical development of nuclear warheads. North Korea has long sought to sell its know-how on nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles to other nations willing to pay for it. Proliferation at its worst. For nearly 2.5 decades, going back to the President Clinton administration of the mid-1990s, the U.S. in good faith has attempted to resolve the North Korean issues through diplomacy, food shipments, and cash infusion into their economy. Despite those efforts, North Korea has remained defiant and sworn to nuclear weapons development. China and Russia had been ambiguous with their help to resolve this issue. The United States has determined a different approach is now warranted to deal with North Korea, one which will take a more sober view of the imminent threat posed to the United States and the region. 3 carrier strike groups are assembling in the Sea of Japan. The THAAD anti-missile system is in process of being installed in South Korea, and joint military exercises are underway with Japan to ready all necessary forces in the event they are called upon to strike the Hermit Kingdom. And to add fuel to the fire, the young 22-year-old American college student who has been held in North Korea over the past 17 months and sentenced to a 15-year term of hard labor in North Korea's notorious prisons was returned by secret negotiations back to the United States in mid-June. His physical condition was critical. He returned in a vegetable state with significant loss of brain tissues and the inability to communicate. He died on June 19th without ever regaining consciousness. And then we have Iran, posing a clear and present danger to the stability of the entire Middle East. Iran, a country of nearly 81 million people, is an ancient and diverse country, with a rich and vibrant history stretching over several millennia, modern in some respect and medieval in others. Iran is ruled under a theocratic republic, and as such has only the illusion of being a democracy. It is, however, a republic with a very light democratic structures. The real power in Iran's governance is the theocratic dictatorship, ruled by the supreme leader, the grand religious imam known as the Al-Khamenei. Autocratic in every way, he convulses with deep animus towards the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Iran, with a large population of 81 million, has an insatiable aggression towards the small democratic state of Israel, with only a population of a mere 8.5 million. Iran has threatened upon several occasions to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and funds radical anti-Israel terror groups in the Gaza Strip, Hamas, and in Lebanon, Hezbollah. The unmitigated hatred for Israel fuels the instability of the region, and reveals Iran's dark geopolitical aims for dominance of the Middle East. Iran has been sponsoring for many years now state terrorism across the Middle East, supporting Shia militia in Iraq, militant groups in Afghanistan and Pakistan, supplying Iranian Revolutionary Guard troops, military leaders, and arms directly to Syria, and supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon with missiles and military supplies, and Hamas in the Gaza Strip at the same in order to box in Israel. And in Yemen, Iran is actively supplying Shiite rebels with arms to fight against the ruling Sunni government and Saudi Arabia. Last, we see Iran heavily militarizing the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz in order to threaten shipping lanes for oil and commerce. On a larger, perhaps more dangerous direction, Iran has been and is pursuing nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, Iran made the strategic decision decades ago to expand military infrastructure to develop and mass produce nuclear-based weaponry. Iran has been developing both nuclear bombs and the corresponding missile delivery systems for several years now with much success. As a consequence, the entire Middle East region has become an active nuclear proliferation zone, as the emergence of a nuclear Iran creates enormous instability with Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and other Arab states. Of course, the United States, Israel, and the other Arab nations strongly objected to Iran gaining such power and the ability to exert extreme military might over the Middle East region. Eventually, a coalition of interests was formed, principally led and driven by the United States, with the specific primary objective of stopping Iran's nuclear aims dead in its tracks. The negotiations went forward, but the primary objective was abandoned by the Obama administration, which lacked the nerve and intellect to achieve a strong, binding deal to stop Iran's nuclear advancements. Instead, Iran applied leverage and exploited the weak Obama negotiating team, and Iran was successful in extracting an agreement which was extremely favorable to their nuclear ambitions and their financial and political aims. President Obama, desperate for a legacy, collapsed on many terms, just to get a public deal done and to create the optics of an achievement. Despite strong reservations made by France and even stronger concerns widely expressed by Israel, the Obama administration pushed a weak deal forward in 2016. Iran was wildly successful, and the U.S. not so much. Iran got the United States to hand over frozen Iranian accounts worth over $150 billion, together with cash and gold amounting to several billion more. Iran got the right to self-inspect its own nuclear sites, progress at reporting. Iran got to keep nearly all of their nation's modern nuclear infrastructure in place, and by doing so, achieved the important aim of maintaining their ability to build nuclear bombs in less than a year, if not months. Last, Iran walked away with no restrictions on their ballistic missile developments. The deal has been widely condemned by military and conservative leadership in America, by Israel, Saudi Arabia, and other Arab countries, and certainly by President Trump. Rex Tillerson, U.S. Secretary of State, has put the world on notice regarding Iran and vows the Trump administration will not shirk its responsibility to address Iran's ability to still threaten international peace and stability. Now we turn to the greatest threat to global stability, the tensions rising between the United States and Russia. Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, has led a very successful effort in modernizing the Russian military capabilities over the past decade and a half, upgrading nuclear weapons and delivery systems, modernizing nuclear submarines, expanding military air coverage, and both defensive and offensive capabilities. Equally, he has handedly outfoxed 8 years of the Obama administration and expanded Russia's reach across the world, especially in the Middle East, where Russia has been largely frozen out by U.S. strategy for nearly 4 decades. Putin, in 1 month alone, checkmates the naive Obama and establishes a strong military presence and influence in Syria, Iraq, and amongst Hezbollah and Hamas radical militias. His military has adopted an aggressive, almost Cold Era policy on confronting U.S. jets and naval assets, and perimeters around the U.S. mainland, as well as major U.S. military bases in Guam, Japan, and the Philippines. And Putin orders forward development of mobile nuclear missile launchers onto the borders of eastern NATO countries in order to intimidate their leadership and threaten their democratic liberties and national freedom. Additionally, he is hardening Russia's infrastructure for underground command bunkers to withstand atomic blasts, leading many military analysts to conclude he's preparing for a nuclear war. Signaling to the United States and Western Europe, he is no longer restrained by the notion of mutually assured destruction, a principle which has kept the peace between Russia and the United States since the height of the Cold Wars in the 1950s and 60s. And Putin has maintained thousands of troops and military ordnance on the Ukrainian border, poised to expand his land aggression at the slightest provocation with brutal efficiency. The US and NATO responded by beefing up their forces in Eastern Europe, in Poland, Latvia, Estonia, and elsewhere, and conducting training exercises with NATO members to align military communications and tactics, all of which is prelude and protocol to the preparation of conflict. Russia has moved significant naval power into the Mediterranean Sea, offshore of Lebanon and Syria, and with it an enormous amount of military firepower to buttress the Syrian regime of Assad. The ships, the aircraft, the missiles have congested into a small area where the US has significant naval forces, France, Britain, and Israel as well. Russia recently announced in early 2017 the intended deployment of a new high-technology nuclear missile. So powerful it is capable of destroying an area the size of Texas or France all in one strike. It's been named the Satan II missile. Beginning under the Obama administration, Russia and US relations plummeted. They've continued to deteriorate into the Trump administration, with relations now characterized as the worst since the Cold War. Putin has had a lot of legroom for over 8 years running over Obama, and now with Trump he's faced with an international leader not afraid to leverage the superpower capabilities of the US in order to assert the country's interests throughout the world. The risk of a clash of competing interests is pronounced. To heighten world concerns of probable confrontation with the West, Russian authorities have publicly been urging citizens to find out where the closest bunker is, as they fear the deterioration of relations may lead to a likely, if not imminent, nuclear war. In the spring of 2017, Russia communicated 2 additional military technical developments, each posing serious risk to US and British naval forces. One is an electronic jamming capability which renders a ship's communications blind. The other is an advanced hypersonic cruise missile capable of speeds exceeding 4,600 miles per hour, and it is impervious to the most advanced surface-to-air defense missile capabilities. Another concerning development occurred on June 20, 2017. Russia warned the United States it would shoot down any US or coalition aircraft west of the Euphrates River in Syria. The US Pentagon responded with a blunt message informing Russia that the US aircraft will respond to any threat or counterforce. Regrettably, we now have 2 superpower rivals merely seconds away from the possibility of armed conflict. And clearly, if that were to happen, it would be extremely difficult to contain an expansion of hostilities which would likely engulf the region and the entire world. In both Putin and Trump, we have 2 world leaders, pugnacious and arrogant, and the number of conflicts concerning both nations is long and growing. Relations are dangerously strained, and world peace or world war hangs in the balance. We are at a serious crossroad in human history. Little wonder in 2016, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists announced it's now 3 minutes to midnight on the world's doomsday clock. If that doesn't alarm you, it should. We are the closest now to nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, and many people of means are themselves quietly buying land someplace safe in the world and building nuclear bunkers, as their calculus leads them to believe things are not going to work out well for humanity. Shifting the subject, let's talk about a 4th important institution in this primary group, leadership itself. Institutionally, we are referring to the leadership of social forces, either positively or negatively influencing and shaping our unfolding culture. Remember always, events, circumstances, social forces, good and bad, peaceful and destructive, are largely controllable by people. the leaders amongst us. We are referencing specifically to leadership at all institutional levels of society, internationally, nationally, and even locally. Whenever, whomever, or wherever, leadership emerges to combat or hasten the impact of social forces which are hurting or helping humankind through our culture and society. Social leadership on the principal issues humanity faces regarding subjects like concern for family and loved ones, morality, health, life, security, war and peace, human dignity, are invariably expressed through people, through groups and the cultural institutions they participate within. As these issues emerge and leadership acts or doesn't, our everyday society is subsequently impacted with either uplifting direction and civility or with amoral turbulence and violence. We would like to take a few moments and give some clear examples of what social leadership looks like in our contemporary world. We will share both misleadership, which has a downward impact on culture, and genuine positive leadership, which has an upward effect. Misleadership is exemplified by Iran's ruling supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. As a dictator, he's responsible for misleading his nation into the darkness of war and conflict and destabilizing the Middle East, and pursuing nuclear weapons development, and imprisoning, torturing, and killing many of the greatest voices of reason and guidance among the national interests within Iran, itself a great nation and people. After the first large terror attack in Paris, France, 50 world leaders go to Paris and march hand in hand with the French president and 3 million citizens to show their solidarity with the nation of France and their collective unity against terrorism. This is genuine leadership. Although symbolic, it's important and valuable. Conversely, former President Obama's weak leadership on terror qualifies as an unsettling misleadership, as he refuses to call the source of the terror threats facing our nation by its real name, and by choosing not to stand and walk with the world leaders and the French people in Paris, to show the world U.S. commitment to defeating terrorism. In the home headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency, there is a hollowed wall, whereupon there is a star for each courageous CIA agent who has lost his or her life in the service of our nation. An honorable and distinctive pursuit of protecting our freedoms at home and abroad through the clandestine services, protecting us from a merciless enemy who seeks our destruction through hostile intentions and designs upon our innocence across America. These brave men and women, so depicted by a single anonymous star, are silently recognized in perpetuity for laying down their only life to protect us against terrorism and adversarial intents against free people throughout the world. And we have a clearing example of cowardice and betrayal to their honorable lives in one Private Bradley Manning, who unilaterally and voluntarily committed an act of treachery and utter disgrace by copying and giving national secrets to WikiLeaks so that they can be widely disseminated to the nation's enemies, in an effort leaking the largest cache of classified documents in U.S. history, rivaling that of Snowden. He is caught, tried, and sentenced to 35 years of military prison. In a remarkable act of further disgrace, President Obama, in his last days of office, commutes Manning's 35-year sentence and lets him go free, despite how Manning betrayed the nation's trust and betrayed his brothers on the field of combat. The intelligence community, the military men and women in uniform, and high-integrity political and business leaders across America are simply shocked and angered by Obama's action, and they express a universal criticism of misleadership against a foolish and self-absorbed president. Especially when Obama's act was for political reasons. This is what moral relativity looks and sounds like. A self-serving president chooses, with little thought or conscience, other than banal political calculus, to commit an elitist, self-ingratiating act to garner favor with the transgender LGBT community, seeking to polish his LGBT legacy. And of course, widely acclaimed by one of the nation's foremost moral relativist organizations, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. always to be found supporting anything striking down wholesome values and energetically supporting the wrong ones. To moral relativists like Obama and the ACLU, this loyalty is to be celebrated and championed, and fidelity to the nation is to be despised. Forget about the honorable service of the men, women, and youth who have given their very lives fighting for our democratic freedoms. Forget about their honor and sacrifice. Forget about the families who endured the pain and loss of their loved ones in service to our nation. Forget about holding their lives sacred in our memories and national leadership. Instead, our former president, Barack Obama, chose to free and honor a traitor who has placed future American lives in danger. Instead, Obama chose to honor dishonesty and deception in order to selfishly score political points at the expense of our national security. It is simply not what leadership is about. It is simply not what our brave died for. Alternatively, we have a remarkable example of global leadership between leading religious voices in the world, calling for peace, love, and respect for humanity. In May of 2017, President Trump travels to Saudi Arabia to meet with the heads of state of 50 Arab nations. He courageously delivers a clear, focused speech to unite the Arab world against both the ISIS terror threat and against Iran, the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. The visit and speech is a magnificent example of true leadership on a set of issues plaguing the world, and President Trump is widely complimented for both a successful and historic achievement, having done in the short span of a month what his predecessor failed to do in over 8 years. In this particular example, we see an indelible contrast and measure of leadership. In June of 2017, Theresa May addresses the United Kingdom and the world in response to the terror attacks in Britain. She decries the wanton ISIS killings of innocents and calls for a strengthening of nerve and focus and an unrelenting commitment to defeating radical Islamic terrorism wherever it may be. Inherent in her remarks is a definitive admonition against past liberal policies and beliefs which have contributed to porous borders and over 25,000 radicals under suspicion just within England. An issue of considerable importance is global and national moral leadership. There is political, business, military leadership points in any nation or region. However, the voices which reach both our minds and hearts are the most important in our world. Our national cultures have regrettably allowed the moral relativists to deliberately erode moral standards while they openly scorn God. We must recognize this core and causal force, cascading across our civilizations with its destructive rancor and death. We must discern we are being misled and deceived into a precarious vulnerability, and our children deserve better. We would like to look for the right kind of moral, geopolitical leadership from the United Nations, but it doesn't happen. As the cartoon suggests, the UN is an international agency of moral relativism and scandal, wholly deficient of the ability and integrity to lead on matters of great consequence. And the moral relativism bleeds through the UN agencies at will, emerging in major and costly UN programs. Invariably upon investigation, corruption, greed, and incompetency is found rotting the inside leadership and its programs, impairing its true mission and possible role as an institution of global leadership. Senator Malcolm Wallop of Wyoming, now retired, was one of the foremost authorities on how the UN works, acts, and behaves. His final conclusion, after many years of dealing with congressional oversight of UN programs, was concisely made clear in his quote before you. The UN, unfortunately, has evolved into a feckless institution of functionaries and bureaucrats. Potential leadership is suffocated by infighting, nations biased with social justice intents, and the utter lack of professional accountability. When our citizens and youth of today are asked what leaders they admire most, a true mixed assortment of names emerge. A few are deceased and genuine leaders, most are rich businessmen, and a few are politicians of dubious notoriety, and one leader of moral authority is recognized, Pope Francis. We need more leaders of integrity and truth like Pope Francis, globally, nationally, and locally. Leaders who will be recognized and admired by an informed and morally awakened world. Only through such awakening to the genuine principles and values of the human heart, as led by clarion voices, will humankind have a chance to successfully reach a new century. Here in America, in our culture, in our active society, we need to think about and ask ourselves where our national moral leadership is regarding the negative forces we face, the support of the family, community, and global stability. Who are we listening to and following and providing the wisdom and guidance which will galvanize us all to take on the tough issues and steer us away from the misleading entanglement of ideological bickering and the polarization which has led to national paralysis? Across the spectrum, let's ask who's standing up to be heard. Who is leading the moral discussions of engagement and principle? Who is bearing the torch of truth in the midst of the national darkness which is clouding our lives and the future before us? As we complete our video narrative on social leadership, here are a few thoughts to consider. The effects of relative morality, or no morality at all, is clearly eroding the quality of our society, the safety of our world, and the communities wherein we live. And the American family is under siege. The voices of reasoned leadership are muted, if at all expressed, and our national liberal leadership is clearly failing us. This concludes Video 6D Part 4 on Social and Leadership. Please continue on to Academia and Learning for the next video narrative, covering the fifth primary institutional group within our contemporary culture. Go to Video 6E.